What I remember most is it was clear we were going to move, and there was no question about it. What I remember is Mimi, you're walking around looking for a place we might move. And so what I remember you're saying is that you walked around and you had found the perfect spot for us. And this was Pillsbury Hall.
What I recall is, number one, you were chair of English,
Right.
and you were the first female chair ever.
Right.
And I was the director of the MFA program in creative writing, which was new. It was, we had just created this new degree. And so we were both administrators, and we talked to each other a lot. And when Julia Davis, then dean, proposed that we move to the West Bank, you and I went over there and we looked at the space they had imagined for us, which was very cramped and worse than what we had in Lind Hall.
Yeah, it was.
And you observed that there was actually no space where our entire faculty could gather for a meeting. And the response from the dean's office was something like, well, you could rent space for meetings. And you just said, no, that we're not going to do that. That's not going to work for us.
I remember the thing that made them be quiet. I said, if you proposed a meeting that we could not meet in our space, but we would have to rent space from one of the other disciplines around the hall, or around the other buildings, I said my most timid faculty member would rebel. And I think that did bother them.
Well, they backed off a little bit, but at the same time, you know, our space in Lind was never adequate.
No.
And since the question came up of moving, we thought, well, what would be a better place to move? Mm-hmm. And I remember seeing an article in the Daily about historic buildings, and they were covering the historic buildings on campus. And this feature was on Pillsbury Hall. And so I looked at that and I thought, wow, this is just right for us. It's currently a science building, and geology, now Earth Sciences, was occupying it. It was not really, it was intended originally as a science building when Governor Pillsbury gave the money to create it. But it just wasn't appropriate for a science department at present. And they were actually looking to move. We found that out subsequently, that they understood that this was not the right place for them. And in fact, their faculty were scattered across campus because they needed lab space. And Pillsbury Hall could not provide that. In any case, once I read that article, I actually looked down the street. I mean, Pillsbury Hall is within a very short walking distance of Lind. And I'd seen it before, but never really thought about it as a possible home for English. And I thought, well, that's a perfect humanities building. So we thought we needed more room and we needed a real home, because English didn't belong in a building that was originally called mechanical engineering. And when it was renamed Lind, it sounded, you know, like more appropriate for humanities department. But it was really designed for that quarter, that area, which was then called the Institute of Technology. It was their district, their space. In any case, we were supposed to be in that building in a temporary way when we were moved there, and it was long before you and I actually were hired. And temporary became permanent over time, and we kept losing space over time. So we knew that we needed more space, and also we had a vision for the department that was very expansive, and partly because the MFA program was new, I was imagining how we might grow over time, as in fact we have. And we needed a sense of community for our students. a space where they would feel, well, where they could gather. We observed that there was actually no space for undergraduates to get together, either just socially or to plan projects like the undergraduate literary magazine. And they used to literally sit on the floor, on the second floor of Lind, outside of the English department office. So that was sad. I mean, that was deeply sad.
I remember that there was also something else. They would eat their lunches sitting on the floor.
Yeah.
So they would
study, they'd take out their laptops. Yeah. And fortunately, what happened then is that Julia Davis made some decisions for the college, not involving us, that were very controversial, and she had to leave. She resigned, and we had an interim dean who was appointed, Bob Holt, who was very favorable towards English as it happened. And you were having a conversation with him as chair of the department about this space issue and how we did not want to go to the West Bank. And he said, in my memory to you, how about Pillsbury Hall? So we thought, okay, this is a go. We can do this. We have the support of then Dean Bob Holt. So then we started talking to, well, there were a lot of things that you were initiating at that time, one of which was a planning and development committee in the department, which we had not had before. We had a development officer assigned to us from the college, Bruce Forstein. Mm-hmm. He was very helpful to us. He was imaginative. He helped us set up the planning and development committee. And then out of that, you established the advisory board, which we had never had before. The English department had never had an advisory board, and in fact, most departments in the college did not have them. But Bruce was very much on board with this, and we worked with him to engage people who cared about the department, who were members of the community. And among the first ones, as I recall, were Tom Keller. He was the family representative of the Edelstein-Keller Endowment, and as such, he participated in events involving creative writing because we used Edelstein-Keller money to invite visiting writers to campus. So he was already engaged with us, and he agreed immediately to join. Then Paul Taylor joined us, and he stayed with us throughout this process. Anyway, so we were building the advisory board, and I remember talking to Tom Keller about our dream of Pillsbury Hall, which was then supported by Bob Holt. And he said, would you like me to introduce you to Bob Odegaard? And I knew that Bob Odegaard was the former head of the University Foundation, and that he was the genius behind the university's first capital campaign. So of course I said yes. So he arranged Tom did, lunch at the Minneapolis Club, and he introduced me to Bob Odegaard and then left it up to me to do the talking. So I thought, okay, I'll just put it out there why I think this is a good idea and how it will help English, and geology wants to get out of there anyway. And I remember what he said to me, because he has now passed, unfortunately. He said, at the very end, he said almost nothing, and I was beginning to panic. And then he said, if you think of this as a long-term development project, I will help you. And I said, oh yes, of course it's a long-term development project. I never imagined 25 years. I thought maybe 5, maybe 10 max. Anyway, he arranged for us, you and Tom Keller, and me, and himself, to meet with President Udall, who was the then president. And President Udall, some important things about him were that when he arrived on campus, some buildings had been, quote, decommissioned, Nicholson and Jones. And what that meant is that they were to be neglected, unused, and eventually torn down. One of the first things that President Udall did is reverse that decision. He just said, no, we're not going to do that. And the Board of Regents had already approved it, and he said no. And at that moment in time, he created what we now think of as the historic district, which includes Nicholson and Jones and Falwell and, of course, Pillsbury Hall and Burton and whatever else, Eddy. Anyway, he had an interest in historic preservation, and he saw that Pillsbury Hall was in desperate need of historic preservation. Like the exterior was perfect. It had always been maintained because the building was on the National Register for Historic Places, and that was required. You couldn't tear it down. It was never a candidate for decommissioning. But the inside was a wreck, and well, it was a mess, and as you described it. And I remember also Russell Bennett, who became the chair of the second Capitol campaign, once saying memorably that it was Pearl Harbor. The inside was Pearl Harbor. So that gives you an idea of how much the building needed loving care and attention on the inside. So in my mind, this is phase one of the project, in which we all had high energy for it, and we thought it was going to happen
I want to say something
faster rather than more slowly.
I want to say something about Bob Holt, though, because this was really important. He said the central departments of the humanities should be philosophy, English, and history.
Mm-hmm.
And philosophy and history are already on the West Bank and well taken care of. But English isn't well taken care of, but it should be. Bob Holt was crucial here in saying, just taking charge and just saying, he was, well known, respected, good at what he did. And so for him to come in and just take this view was very important.
Pillsbury Hall is not only architecturally distinguished, but also historically important to the university, in that it was Governor Pillsbury who basically made the university what it is today. Mm-hmm. And he gave the money for this building in recognition of the legislature agreeing to make this campus the land-grant campus of the state. Mm-hmm. That was sort of the beginning. And then he became a lifetime regent of the university. It was his heart and soul. Building this university was his heart and soul. And he was a man who, when he arrived in Minnesota as a young man, had only a secondary school education. But he believed in education as critical to the growth of the state, and he supported it for his once he became involved with the university, which actually involved his settling the debts. So President Udall was, in a sense, picking up on the vision that Governor Pillsbury had for the university. However, he then left. He left sooner than we imagined. Mm-hmm. So we kind of lost that initial energy.
And when you talk about Bob Odegaard,
mm-hmm.
and I was also thinking about Tom Sullivan. And Tom Sullivan was, he came to be provost after being dean of the law school.
Right.
And there, where he was into difficulty, is that the lawyers wanted no part of fundraising. They didn't do that. They wanted to be supported by the university, and they did not see it as any part of their work to be involved. That, of course, has changed for them. But anyway, so he liked it.
Well, we're moving now into what I think of as phase 2. Phase
Yeah.
1 was President Udall.
Yeah.
Phase 2 is President Brunix and his team, and Tom Sullivan was his provost. And Kathy O'Brien, his vice president for university services, who is, as she once said, I'm in charge of all of the buildings on campus.
She did.
So, anyway, I don't remember the complete sequence here, but I do recall going to a presentation that Kathy made. This is over in the campus club, about historic buildings on campus. And I just went as a faculty member because this was advertised to everyone. And she gave a presentation of every significant historic building on campus, which was quite amazing, including Pillsbury Hall. So I went up to her afterwards and introduced myself and said, well, you know, we in English have an interest in this building and we would like to see it renovated. And we just sort of started a conversation. And then somewhat later, I think it was, that we started talking with President Brunix, who, when he came into office, really knew nothing about our vision for English and this building. So we had to basically explain to him, you know, what we had, the conversations we had had with President Udall, why we thought this was a good idea, why this building was so significant to the entire university. And he became interested. You know, I just said, well, that's an interesting idea. And yeah, I know members of the Pillsbury family, and you know, it's a good idea. And he said to Tom, I'm going to put you in charge of fundraising for Pillsbury Hall. So that's how we began to work with Tom. And I remember Tom saying, people told me I couldn't raise money for a law school building, and I did it. You know, so he was very independent, and he was very self-confident because he had been there, done that. He had raised the money for the new building on the West Bank for the law school, which is quite beautiful.
Yeah.
So he thought, yeah, he could do that for us, you know, raise money for Pillsbury Hall. So we started to work with him, and he had a special assistant, John Binks, and he assigned John. John had many things that he was working on with Tom, but Tom assigned him specifically to Pillsbury Hall. So we met with John Binks, I would say every 2 weeks or so.
Yeah.
And we saw Tom Sullivan about once a month, and we'd report back to him. And Kathy, in the meantime, was thinking about how can we make these space moves work? In other words, geology has to go someplace that they're happy with before the building can be emptied to be renovated on the interior. And how is this going to work? So she came up with a couple of different plans, and the one that finally did work was that physics would get a new building, a completely new building, that then Tate, where they had been located, would be renovated, and geology could move in there and consolidate its faculty from other parts of the campus. And then Pillsbury could be renovated for English. So this was
and aerospace engineering had to get something too.
This is a long-term plan, but she put it together. She was the genius, you know, the space person behind that plan. So to make it, you know, feasible, possible for the building to be renovated. And so we worked with John Banks, and at this point in time, we had also become friends with Russell Bennett, who was as I said earlier, the chair of the university's second capital campaign. Russ knew Phil Pillsbury Jr., who was living in Washington, D.C., but had a summer home in Minnesota. And he had been designated, or he had been pointed out to us by Sally Pillsbury as the ideal family advocate, the person to pull the scattered members of the family together to support the renovation of this building. But it took us a while to make real contact with Phil Pillsbury, and Russell Bennett also knew Richard Moe, who was then head of the National Trust for Historic Preservation in Washington, D.C. As it happened, Dick Moe was good friends with Phil Pillsbury, and so through all of these connections over a period of time, we made connection with Phil and his wife Nina. And in fact, we met them at a Yale Alumni Association of the Northwest, which was a year-end kind of dinner gathering, and we talked with them about this project, and they were interested. They connected with Bob Brunix and Tom Sullivan, and then we were up and running again. But I think the high point really was an exhibit of archival drawings of the firm of Leroy S. Buffington, who was the person who, it was his firm that built this building, along with, there were 3 others on campus. I think it's Burton, Eddy, and Nicholson. In any case, the university has his archival drawings in the Northwest Architectural Archives, and they are quite beautiful. And they include drawings of Pillsbury Hall, along with a beautiful watercolor that is attributed to the design architect Harvey Ellis, who is quite well known. Anyway, so we created this exhibit as a part of a session organized for the annual meeting of the National Trust that was held in St. Paul that year. We planned together a tour of the historic buildings on campus to culminate in this exhibit at the Weissman, and it was Lindell who offered the space for it. So then we thought, you and I and John Banks working together, why don't we have a private reception for members of the Pillsbury family? We're going to do this, we're going to have this exhibit, why don't we create a special event for them? So Tom Sullivan said yes, and so did President Brunix. And you and I and John Banks planned that with the help of Phil Pillsbury, who had, of course, this list of all the family members. So he wrote to them and invited them to this exhibit. Some came from out of town. It was a beautiful event. So that was our moment of glory, you might say, in which we were reaching out to as many members of the Pillsbury family as we had access to make our case for renovating this extraordinary building with their name on it, specifically for English. And the idea then still was that if you raise money for something, it will help you then when you go to the legislature for a more substantial request, that it will jumpstart things, it will get things moving faster. And anyway, we were going great guns at this moment in time.
You know, one of the things that I'm also just recalling, because you brought it up, this event and finding out that the library had these drawings and about the men who were responsible for the buildings and so on, I began to learn so much about architecture, which I knew nothing at all.
We also just reached out to the historic preservation community here, not just in Washington, D.C. And we got to know people here who were more knowledgeable than we about this building. And one of the main people we got to know was John Hughes. We went to a lecture that he gave, or he organized a lecture on campus with a Harvey Ellis scholar, John Gunther, who is from Missouri, and learned quite a bit more about Harvey Ellis and his career, as well as his involvement in the design of this building. So John Hughes became a supporter of this project, and he reached out to Mary LaHammer at some point in time, and she did a video of this building for St. Paul Almanac. You know, when I look back over all of this history, it seems to me it was really carried by presidents, and each contributed something very significant. President Udall gave us kind of the courage to go forward, and because he supported our vision, it felt real. I mean, you and I couldn't do this alone. We had to have
not at all
the university behind us, and even more so with President Brunix and Tom Sullivan. They were really gung-ho about this project and carried it a great way forward. But then when they all scattered, we had to, in effect, start over again with the next administration, with President Kaler, who again came in not knowing anything about this project. It took us a while to get through to him, but once we did, he said, it's going to happen. I remember saying this memorably, it's going to happen, and it's the right thing to do. So by this point in time, we were on the university's capital budget request, which is critical for the legislature. And this was, I think, Kathy O'Brien's parting gift to us, that she had set it up. The sequence was physics, Tate, Pillsbury. Every 2 years, one of them would come up for funding at the legislature. And when President Kaler arrived, he basically confirmed this structure, you know, so he inherited it and said yes, he put his imprimatur on it. So, and miraculously, the funding came through for physics. That building got built, and then the funding came through for Tate. And so we came up then in 2016, which was not a particularly good year at the legislature. And we were on a list of 6 projects, and we were ranked number 6. So that was not favorable.
I remember.
And I remember you and I went to talk with Alice Hausman at the legislature because we understood that she had been a prime mover in getting the funding for the Bell Museum, which had been, I don't know, it had gone up to the legislature and kept, you know, was not funded, and the university sort of gave up on it, but she didn't.
She went over and got it.
She wanted that building, and we understood that she was an important person in getting the funding. So we went to talk to her, and we just got an appointment, and she was lovely. Every time we reached out to a legislator, they just said yes. You know, we went and talked to them. So, and everybody we talked to was supportive of this project. But what she said to us, as I recall, was, well, there are 6 projects before us, and you are ranked number 6. You're not going to get it.
Yeah, she did.
Oh, no way is this going to happen this time around. So we thought she was probably right, and
I think we asked her if she had suggestions about what to do, so we would get a higher ranking.
Well, we didn't get a higher ranking.
No, I know, but I mean in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we decided to give it our best effort regardless, and we created, with Terry Sutton's help, a lot of flyers and informational pieces of paper, beautifully designed, and many of them, most of them in color, I think, and not just black and white.
Right.
And we just trekked over to the legislature in the winter months, as I recall, and distributed them at various intervals throughout the session to keep people's attention on this project. And of course, we did not get funded that year. So back to the legislature in 2018. And we're getting to the end of the story because we got funding that year. But we did the same thing. We went back, we talked to Alice Hausman again. Paul Taylor, who was a charter member of our advisory board way back in the beginning, along with Tom Keller and Judy Healy and Bob Garner. Bob Garner is the one who got us this beautiful Pillsbury Hall information brochure, A Home for English, the Renovation Initiative, which went through 3 editions.
Not only that, he got it for us pro bono.
Yes.
Because it would be fantastically expensive to create. So he got it for us pro bono, and all we had to pay was something very minimal. Like it was, I don't know, it was like $200 for paint or something. I don't remember what it was. But anyway, it was the one thing that couldn't be given pro bono. So, but anyway, he did get that, and it won a prize from the people who did it. I mean, in their
Cantor group, yeah.
It won a prize for them as the
Bob
best.
knew the head of that design group. That's how that happened. Anyway, Paul Taylor, who gave us advice from the beginning, very practical advice, and often Paul would tell us discouraging things, as I remember, and he was always right. Paul Taylor went to the legislature, I think, almost every day. He attended all these endless committee meetings. He got to know everyone. He introduced us to individual legislators. He was tireless in promoting our project, which was really key, because if you don't know anything about a project, you don't attach to it. So he did that for us. And he also talked to members of the Board of Regents. I remember that on the second try, we tried to make connection with some key board members, and we did, actually. But Paul was instrumental in that because he knew everybody on the board, and he introduced us also to board members and helped to educate them about why this was, what's so hot about this building, you know? What's important about Pillsbury Hall and the legacy of the Governor of Pillsbury to the university? Why is it architecturally distinguished? Why does it need interior renovation? If you look at the outside, it looks fine. You really have to go inside in order to understand what the problem is. So he was really instrumental the second time around. And here's a great part of the story. Karen Kaler,
yes,
became a passionate advocate. And sadly, we didn't know that she had an interest in historic preservation. If we had, we would have gone straight to her instead of President Kaler when he arrived. But we did get introduced to her by Nancy Lindahl. And Nancy loved this project. She really loved it. And so she said, you have to meet Karen Kaler. And I was like, sure. Why not? So we did. And Karen, she was just really excited about this building and its possibilities. So she suggested that we have a reception at East Cliff. And this was prior to the legislative appropriation, and her aim was to help, move us over that, over that line. So we did have this reception, and I think it was May of 2018, including various community leaders, members of the Board of Regents, members of our advisory board, and so forth. We scanned the possible donor community in terms of historic preservation, and created this event really on short notice, and it was quite wonderful. It was beautiful. So that was another high, I would call that another high point,
Yeah,
really.
it was.
And we were now in the legislative mode of funding instead of fundraising. We were looking for money from the legislature. And wonder of wonders, we succeeded this time around. We were, I think, number 3 on a list of 3 projects at this time. So that was a better prospect for us.
Right.
And that's basically the story. That's how the renovation happened.
I was meeting with a man, and Governor Dayton's, right-hand assistant was there. But what I remember is this person saying, "Oh, Governor Dayton's going to sign this. He's going to sign it."
You're reminding me that in 2016, we were not on Governor Dayton's preferred list.
Right. Yes.
On his
absolutely.
budget list.
Mm-hmm.
And we were told not to be too dashed about this, but it was actually not very good for us that we weren't on his preferred list.
Yeah.
So in 2018, actually it was Bob Brunix who suggested we might get in touch with his budget officer, who was then Myron Franz. Mm-hmm. And Bob Brunix gave me his email address. Mm-hmm. So I wrote to him and also Governor Dayton and said, in effect, would you like to have a tour of Pillsbury Hall? And, this is why we're behind this project, and so on and so forth, but we'd love to show you the interior of the building. And Myron Franz wrote back and said yes. And I remember he gave me one day and one time frame that he was free. And so we said, we'll do it. We're gonna make this happen, If you can come, we'll get this tour together. So we did. We were working with the college, of course, and their personnel, because they had the keys to the building. We couldn't get in without them. And I sent him our informational stuff, everything I could think of that might help him understand what the project was, including this incredible brochure. And when he came with his assistant, as I recall. It's a woman whose name I don't remember offhand, and he had his packet of stuff with him, and he was smiling. And I remember thinking, this is a good sign.
Yeah, right.
So we went through the whole building, and one of the features of a tour, any tour of Pillsbury Hall at that time, was the attic. Because it is that space is so magnificent. It has these gorgeous beams, and it was completely open, although it was full of junk at the time. But you could look at that attic and see its potential. And everyone who saw it loved it. It was like the highlight of the building. They all loved the attic.
That's what Al Gale called the mother of all attics.
The mother of all attics, yes, he did. Anyway, so we took Myron Franz through the building, and he all but said that we would be on Governor Dayton's list at the very end, because one of our tour group members, who was kind of brash, just kind of put the word to, it's like, well, what more do we have to do to convince you, or something? And he said, I think you've done it. Or something, words to that effect, like, you've done everything you can. And I thought, I think this means that we're going to be on the list this time. And indeed, we were. Yeah. And now Myron Franz is the chief financial officer, as I understand, of the university. And I saw an event that this is a Zoom call sponsored by the University of Minnesota Retirees Association. And it wasn't about this subject, but at the very end, he mentioned how happy he was given, in his role as Governor Dayton's budget officer, that Pillsbury Hall had been funded.
Right.
So he turned out to be an advocate, quiet advocate, someone who helped us invisibly, but in a real way. And we worked so hard, Shirley.
Yes.
We used to joke, actually, about coming to the opening of Pillsbury Hall in wheelchairs.
We did. I said, they'll bring me out
And
from
here
the nursing
I have
home.
a cane,
No, I said, they will bring us, somebody will bring me out in a wheelchair from a nursing home somewhere and say,
well, it happened
she did
before
it
then.
all.
Thank God. We're still alive. Yeah, and many people who did help us are gone.
Yeah, that's true.
Sadly,
I mean,
Phil
that list-
Pillsbury
Yeah.
died just this last spring, so some of them did not get to see the end result that we've been able to see. So, and now we can picture English thriving in Pillsbury Hall.
Yeah, and it also, we really, at some point, we thought, we've spent all this energy and time in our lives on this, and is it going to really come to nothing? Is it just going to, that you've really spent all this energy and it's nowhere?
There were so many cliffhanging moments in this project. When you think about 25 years, how many times it seemed to just fall apart. It looked like, oh, it's gone now. What happened? We kept it going. And fortunately, we had the kinds of supporters we needed at the right times that we needed them. And I want to put in a special word of, I don't know how to put it, admiration, gratitude, profound gratitude to Tom Keller, who was there at the beginning and who is still with us, and who has cared profoundly about the fate of this department, who has supported the creative writing program now in its undergraduate manifestation as a minor in English, as well as the MFA program, which is a phenomenal success. But without him, we wouldn't have gotten off the ground. And the other person who has been a silent, often supporter, but a profound source of support is former President Bob Brennix. I can't tell you how much his consistent support over time, even when he was not president, has meant to us. And I mean, anyone can be happy and proud of the beautiful interior of Pillsbury Hall. You even if you don't have never taken a class in English and don't care about it, you can care about this building. It's really deserved this kind of attention for many, many years, and now it has it.
I hope it brings kind of new energy. And, the humanities are not in a particularly good place nationally. And so I hope it gives them energy to insist on their leadership and on the importance of the discipline, period. And, one of the things, I'm in a book club, and one of the things that we keep up with kind of is the number of books that are sold each year, which is greatly at odds with the kind of reputation of reading and books and whatever. But I mean, people are reading all the time. And, I have a little grandson who was reading fiction when he was 5. And so, people, I hope it will bring some visibility to the importance, and also discussion of what it means how it's different to read something than just to memorize or know something, or I hope it will. I hope it will give impetus to the fullness that the discipline should bring. So that's one of the things,
I have to say, this is an absolutely gorgeous building. I love it. I think I just fell in love with it, from the beginning, when we were told we had to move. I thought, well, let's move someplace nice, someplace we like. And maybe not everyone will share my feelings about this building, but it is really beautiful. On the outside, and now it's beautiful on the inside. And one of our colleagues who supported this project, and like us, is now recently retired, Patricia Hampel, used to say, architecture is destiny. And not everyone understood what she meant by that, but I did. The space you live in does affect how you feel about yourself. And if you are in beautiful surroundings, it is uplifting. So I can't help but think that our students will love this building, that our faculty will love it. One thing also I've noticed when Shirley and I had a tour of the building recently, for the first time, the renovated building, I noticed that faculty are more from different disciplinary areas and parts of the department are grouped together, so that someone who teaches primarily in creative writing may have an office right across from someone who teaches, let's say, 18th century literature. And then there's this wonderful space in the middle where you can actually walk out of your office and meet somebody from the other side. I think that the way the building is organized is going to foster more conversation within the department, not only among students who have now a place where they can sit down and open up their laptop computers and study and also gather to plan projects together, but faculty are more likely, I think, to engage with one another across their areas of expertise and specialty. And we're also finally in the part of the area of the university where the humanities are clustered or gathered. That was part of the idea from the beginning, that this is a humanities area. We were once in Falwell, and now we're closer to Falwell. You can actually walk across the quad and talk to somebody in another language department. So we're in the right place in every sense of the word. And I think English, it is central to everything that we do. So I think the department will live into that identity. That is my hope. That was my dream. It's a great building and it's a great department.
Yeah.
So we finally came together.